Come, Holy Spirit, and guide us now as we listen to your word. Speak to our hearts, and grant that this may be a quiet time in your sacred presence in which you yourself minister to the depth of our soul. The Lord, in his providence, has called us apart. We need, therefore, to leave behind the noise that we've been bathed in before we got here. That can happen on several levels. It can happen inside our own head. It can happen also in what comes out of us. So I want to bring you into the teaching of the Lord on one specific issue this morning. We find it in the 12th chapter of St. Matthew. It's in particular one verse 36. But I'll just take the whole paragraph. Make a tree sound, and its fruit will be sound. Make a tree rotten, and the fruit will be rotten. For the tree can be told by its fruit. You brood of vipers, how can your speech be good when you are evil? For words flow out of what fills the heart. Good people draw good things from their store of goodness. Bad people draw bad things from their store of badness. So I tell you this, that for every unfounded word people utter, they will answer on Judgment Day. Since it is by your words you will be justified, and by your words condemned. The translation of idle words has puzzled commentators all over the centuries. What is the Lord saying here? Every idle word. And it would seem that these, in Italian, parole oziose, words which have no use, need to be looked at when we're exposed to the Lord in retreat. For it's one of the main areas, if we're honest, where things go wrong on a daily basis. And retreat is there to obvert various tendencies and various consequences, which precisely will come back to us if they're not handled at the last day. So I want to look at how this has been handled by, in one instance, the monastic centuries, but also by all, really, the spiritual authors who have spoken about it. St. John of the Cross, in his Maxims, mentions how a great talker, a loquacious person, is not really able to live an interior life. And it's quite simple. It's because he's leaking too much. The teaching of the great Archbishop of Milan, St. Charles Borromeo, takes this up in the way in which he invites his clergy not to be leaking. When it comes to a moment in which they are warmed, they should not be like a pot without a lid. Therefore, exteriorization, the exterior soul, is disfavored when it comes to everything interior and ultimately to intimacy with the Lord. The Lord has great difficulty in having intimacy with the soul who can't stop, who can't go inwards. Now, in one's life, one has duties of state. The Lord himself spoke. The Lord himself acted. But he was always ultimately what we too are called to do. Now the Lord will bless the words that we utter in our state of life, the teacher, the parent, the priest, who has to speak in virtue of their function. That will be blessed, and they can have a double effect if they're coming from an interior soul. Why? There's not so much leaking going on. The words are each time landing well. It's rather as in a war situation. A soldier who just fires a machine gun all over the place is less efficacious than somebody who's really aiming. So too, our words have to be aimed. There was one mystic soul centuries ago who was taught this by the Lord himself. Let your words be weighed, pesare. To weigh a word is to think, is it worth uttering, and what would be its content. There are some people, not a few, who will say everything that comes through their mind. After a while, people switch off from them, because their words have little depth. Words are like leaves, and where they most abound, much depth of sense beneath is seldom to be found. And so, people who talk a lot, actually, in the long run, are their own worst enemy. They are the ones who have least effect in depth. But if you notice in a conversation, a person who hardly ever talks, if he opens his mouth, suddenly there's a silence. People listen. Oh, it spoke. In handling souls, this applies to anyone in the field of listening. The whole art of reception is something to be cultivated. The very ministry of being able to listen with attention, with genuine interest and care, is very precious, and in our day, perhaps more precious than ever. People are actually, despite all their words, going out of them or coming into them, sometimes very lonely. The Beatles, way back in the 60s, had this song, Eleanor Rigby. There was one line, all the lonely people, where do they all come from? The world is full of lonely people, and we can minister to lonely people, but lonely people need a one-to-one listener. They're not numbers. They're not quantifiable. They're not just part of some kind of census. They are what they are, unique for all eternity and to be saved. This last week, a young person of 19 jumped off a bridge not that far from where we are, right onto the main road underneath. That was the end of her existence. But one wonders whether perhaps that could have been averted had somebody picked up something in time. That can be our case as well. So, verse 36, every idle word. Now, in specifically monastic life, this was looked into also by commentators. Is it permissible or not to have recreation? Now, it was resolved in the specifically Benedictine campus by a timetable which included it, but there were certain parameters and also certain things expected. Various topics of conversation, various manners of speaking, loud, raucous laughter, losing dignity altogether, were not to be encouraged. And St. Benedict himself was not keen on that kind of thing, dignitas. In the specifically Cistercian reform, intensified by the Trappist reform of the reform, that even was excluded. And the result is complete interiority, because perpetual silence leads to no leakage at all. And that is actually very precious. If one has a moment of talking, if one then goes to confession at the end of the week, one will look back and will find proportionately a lot of the material for confession would have happened during that small part of the week or day. That's how we are. Words. We sin a lot. If that is removed, many sins are impossible. Therefore, we need to think, is this word that's about to come out of me going to damage other people or myself? Certain things certainly automatically should be excluded. Anything which is bringing God into the equation, even using the name of God, certainly anything using the holy name specifically, sacred things, the saints, bringing them into the conversation like a punctuation mark when it's not a prayer, that should be immediately excluded, because how at that moment can we be in intimacy with the Lord if we're using him just to make a point? It's often never handled until death. And rightly so, Protestants are quite scandalized by the way that some Catholics are very elastic on this one. No, we are careful about using anything to do with God in conversation. Then anything vulgar, that also, to make a point, is not good. Just using the unexpected, irony, whatever it might be, is far more powerful and shows better education than just falling into the vulgar to make a point. Our first reactions, are they to use a swear word or are they to pray? Because even if no one can hear us, our words are heard by the angels. And actually even our own thoughts can be full of naughty reactions. We think no one hears. The Lord hears. And also the interior conversation going on inside us about other people. Even though we might be very smiley on the outside, we might be bubbling within. It's all heard on high and making our soul bitter. Therefore the interior words also can be idle. We are full of words. Words, words, words. And when it comes also to the extension of that in our interiority, when par excellence we should be interiorly silenced, in the presence of the Lord, that too can be ongoing. Are we able to go into the silent mode? Because if not, then we're incapable of interiority and intimacy with the Lord. There are some priests, for instance, who can't stop talking at the altar. All that one has is a celebration of them. Words, words, words. An unstoppable flow of words. People are already bombarded by words before they get there. But to have more of the same is not to give the Lord a chance. We need to recuperate just interiority also in our liturgical encounters, so that there's a sacred space without human words, and we're not afraid to leave the people with the Lord alone, especially at certain sacred moments when he might have something to say. Many interior souls have picked things up at Holy Communion, and if the priest is blocking that out, or even actually a ministry to just cancel silence for any song at all the time, all the time, all the time, there is no sacred space where the Lord himself, perhaps at that very moment, has something to say. There's a mystic soul alive in, I think it's Colombia, Catalina, and she was allowed to hear certain things and see certain things at Holy Communion and in the Mass itself. And she was given this clear teaching by the Lord, who opened her interior to hear something which humanly she couldn't have heard. It was the person coming back from Holy Communion before her and kneeling in her place. And this mystic was allowed to hear what was going on there. And all she was doing was giving a great shopping list of things she wanted from the Lord at that point. She was using Holy Communion to get things from the Lord. And the Lord let her hear this to warn, through her, us. This is not what he meant it for. At that point, he wants to reign, and he wants us to be still. And a priest, as a mystagogue, has to be an expert at making that happen, creating an atmosphere in which precisely there's none of himself there, but he is bowing the Lord to be Lord of his people. A gentle music ministry in which there is a sacred atmosphere created and sustained without the people being distracted is one thing. A rousy, noisy one is quite a different one. And there are certain kinds of music which do that. They detract and make it impossible to have any kind of encounter. Creating beauty can actually, through the emotions, also open up our pores to receive. So that's a sacred ministry, but there's a very big difference between the two. I want to bring you for a second into what happened centuries ago. This is the formative period of the monastic life, but it concerns us too. Why? Because essentially the structure of the soul is the same, and what works for a soul works for another. They are means that have been encountered and used and tried over the centuries, and they still work. There are no shortcuts in the spiritual life. So listen to this testimony. One of the most notable of the desert fathers in the 4th century was a certain Pambo, Saint Pambo. So he first came to the monasteries of the Nitrian desert, seeking guidance from Egypt's pioneer abbot, the great St. Anthony himself. What shall I do? Be not confident of thy own righteousness. Notice that a person who speaks a lot is very sure of himself. He is convinced of all that he holds, and very little can actually change his mind, because he's always giving off. The person who speaks less learns far more. It applies also in hearing other people, in counselling, direction, spiritual direction, confession. One learns a lot more if one doesn't interfere, if one doesn't stop a person before the person has finished a sentence. Never interrupt. It's actually in one of the wisdom books, there's a hint there that one should not interrupt another in the flow of words. It's a sign of humility, respect, and also a trick which works. By the way, one learns more if one doesn't do this. One hasn't understood a word. Could you repeat that? That will stop the person in his natural flow. So it's better to let that word go, because one will tendentially learn far more by not interrupting. It's a little trick. So his advice is this: be not confident of thy own righteousness. Grieve not over a thing that is past, and be continent, now notice this, be continent, containing, holding in, of thy tongue and belly. Overeating, overdrinking, it all also is linked with lack of temperance on other levels. The person who can't control the tongue usually can't control much else either. So, he became a hermit and was strong on self-denial. The details are given. Praying, fasting, very much into perpetual prayer. But he took a special fancy to Anthony's advice to control his speech. In fact, when he was given his very first reading lesson, his monk teacher began with Psalm 39, line 1. I said, I will watch my ways, so as not to sin with my tongue. That will do for today. He rose abruptly to ponder this single verse and its implications. Thinking it through took him 6 months. Then he returned to his teacher for lesson number 2. Some people speak little because they have little to say. Pambo had much to say, but spoke with great economy. Other people realized this and came to him for advice. Notice, he doesn't enforce himself, he doesn't invade, he is sought after. There was a famous writer, Rufinus. He actually came for counsel. And so did Athanasius himself, great archbishop. And also St. Melania, the abbess. Once, when somebody gave him some money for the poor, the donor suggested that he count it. No! God does not ask how much, but how. End of conversation. But he did not retain that it was the only way of salvation. In this he rejoins basically the gospel in its teaching that it's all about charity. All is but a means to the fullness of charity. Creating a monastic community or creating a domestic church, it's all about charity. And if that's not there, the Lord can't be blessing the situation. All that we do must be one sentence of charity, without anything contradictory. So, both are perfect, he would maintain, regarding the states of life. There are other roads to perfection besides being a monk. Two other hermits gave him a list of their many acts of self-denial and almsgiving. Will these save our souls? I do the same things, but I do not thereby become a good monk. Seek never to offend your neighbour, and you will be saved. People who go around causing pain are not emitting charity. And any word which is sharp is an idle word. However, that does not mean to say that we are unable to control. A teacher must obtain control in class, a parent at home, and a priest in his parish. Otherwise we are walked over and we don't defend the rights of the Lord. We are canes muti, dogs unable to bark. Pambo found that his formula of hard work and deliberate speech served him well. The day he died, he was plaiting a basket for one of his disciples. He said to his gathered monks, in perhaps his longest speech ever, "Since I came into the desert, I have eaten nothing that I have not earned by work, and do not remember that I have ever said anything for which I had need to be sorry afterwards." That meant he weighed his words before they came out of his mouth. We have no control of our words once they are out of the mouth. We do when they're still in the brain. Nevertheless, he said, I must now go to God before I have even begun to serve him. Hermit or not, we must all be cautious about what we say. The Bible must have had people like Pambo in mind when it said, a wise man is silent till the right time comes, but a boasting fool ignores the proper time. A word at the right moment is one thing. A word at the wrong moment is another. We must be careful not to put our foot where our brain should be. In this context, I'd like to quote an example which has always stood up in my memory and mind. It's what happened when I was an internal canonization or beatification system because they have to be hidden. There's no name even on the cross. But there is a system whereby if there was an exceptionally holy monk, they could vote and it would pass the general chapter, but everyone who knew the person it has to be unanimous. And we had this one, it's one of our community, and what they do is, if all the votes are positive, the chapter can give, very rarely but it can happen, this lauda militer vixit. He lived in the order in a praiseworthy manner for so many years, he lived a number of years, but it happened when I was actually in Selignac. It was the ex-prior, he'd been by then vicar of the nuns, Carthusian nuns, that is their chaplain in Nordag, but just listening to what the brethren were saying, I was fascinated. He had entered with my novice master, he was 17 at the time, his name was Don Damio, and he had this particularity that is extremely innocent and pure, but notice he hardly ever spoke. Hardly ever spoke. Now, he was made prior eventually, but it was a great suffering for him because he wanted to be completely enclosed with the Lord inside himself and in this interiority which is completely defended by pure silence. So he was allowed, at his own wish, to have a quieter life with the nuns as their chaplain. They didn't have to talk at all, just minister to them quietly. And I know from what the brethren were saying that he did everything very well. If he was celebrating, they could see that he was in ecstatic mode. There was an angelic beam on his face, as though he was really engaging, perhaps even seeing, we don't know, but there was something there. They knew, they picked it up, and they could sense he was very close to the Lord. The way that we do things is also a word. The way we behave physically is a word. But then, he was only about 67, he wasn't ill, and there was no sign of illness. And the Mother Superior found this billet when she opened his cell, and it said this, that he knew that the Lord was coming for him, and he was leaving him his spiritual testament. He died that day, as he knew he was going to, and the spiritual testament was this: le secret de la vie intérieure, c'est le grand, or rather, le saint silence. The secret of the interior life is holy silence. He saw it as a secret that he was not going to betray. He was not going to in any way leak while he was on earth. He was there only to do one thing, the unum necessarium, and he was going to do it with all his being. And words were his worst enemy. Maybe we could take something of that ourselves. Are our words healing? Are they a sentence of charity? Or are they idle? Are they sharp? Are they too frequent, too heavy, too invasive?